Okay, greetings Subaru lovers and anyone who's interested in analyzing data logs with Mega Log Viewer HD, which is a very affordable program for analyzing your data logs, be they from a AccessPort, from a Tactrix, or from BTSSM. So today's analysis is from a chap in the States, and he's got a 2012 WRX, so that's going to be an EJ255, potentially running a VF52. And now he says he's gotten to check engine lights for the MAF, both intake cam sensors, misfire codes in each cylinder. So he's replaced the MAF and cam sensors with new OEM, and the engine's only running in, and as such it's running a run-in tune with max boost limited to around 8 or 9 psi. He's wondering if he's having any issues with this type of issue before, and that is that while driving the engine stutters between 2000 and 3000 RPM and it drops randomly at idle. Now this is something I've had, of course, owning a Subaru Liberty, aka Legacy GT, and it now has 330,000 kilometers on the original engine. I just recently drove it into the ground and had to replace the turbocharger with another stock turbocharger, a VF46, and I'm still getting over the effects of this service abuse. So in this case, we've got a brand new build, and we've got some replaced sensors, and we also have a data log made with an AccessPort. Now, of course, the first thing I said was, well, log your AVCS, do a driving log. Normal driving will be fine, and we want around 15 minutes of driving, which is ideal because it's a decent sized data set. Of course, more is better in this case, because what we lack in perhaps resolution because of all of these parameters, we're going to buy some of that back just with the amount of data in the data set. Anyway, so the good news was that the log was done, and AVCS, which is VVT inlet left and right, is nigh on perfect. It's just exactly what we want to see, and if we really dig in here, we can just see that it's fine. Unlike some misfire issues, there's no cam sensor dropouts that you would see as little downward spikes in the VVT angles here. However, the engine is misfiring like crazy, and we're just using two of the plots here to kind of break that down and make it, in a sense, a bit more legible because there's so much going on. So basically, we've got per cylinder roughness or misfires right here, and so that's just 1, 2, 3, 4. But we've also averaged bank 1 and bank 2, so we can also see that yes, it's largely, the issue's largely leading on bank 1, which is the right hand side of the engine. We run through, you can see that basically every time the issue leads from bank 1. What does it mean? Well, that's also got to do with the firing order of the engine. However, in this case, the misfires are spread right out. There's no particular, there's nothing really we can particularly latch onto here, just looking at the log overall, although we can see, it's doing it both on load and off load. This is interesting. It's always good to compress the linear log viewer plot down, and you can always, you can see some interesting trends here. So what are we seeing here? Fuel learning is going negative. We can see there's no huge discrepancy with the AVCS right here. One thing I am seeing here is that throughout this particular section, now we're not logging vehicle speed, and just for, I was just going through a bunch of parameters instead of having vehicle speed up here along with PSI, GRPM and TPS. We can see here that this is pretty interesting. So cylinder 4, which is down by the cam sensor on the left hand bank, is just misfiring all the way through here. Well, what does that mean? Misfire, roughness. Basically, it's discrepancies in the timing between ignition events and the cam and crank sensor. And so where there's slight variations in the timing between those on a engine cycle basis, it will register as a misfire event or a cylinder roughness event. Now, if you look up misfire diagnoses, the scope is broad. And what this means, it's anything that can be mechanical, it can be electrical, and it can be related to AFR. So with this particular diagnosis, one of the things we can look at to lead off with is what is the knock learning doing? And we've got feedback knock count and fine learning knock count here along with AFR. And if we run right through there, we can see that there is no fine learning knock count, and that is knock learning related to ignition events and AFR primarily. We can see one instance where there is feedback knock count under load. So this is somewhat of a red flag. It's not a ton of knock, but it's just there and it is under load. So perhaps the owner might consider not wide open throttling the car, and you can see the car was on wide open throttle. So even though it's not making full boost due to the run-in tune, it's probably just not a great idea to what the car at this point until the issues are gotten to. So obviously misfires is an issue. I can see that fuel learning is out of range. So what's considered in range by the aftermarket for fuel learning on a Subaru, fuel learning being a low pass aggregation of fuel correction. So fuel correction is very much an instantaneous response to closed loop, where the ECU is using the front AF sensor to trim the fuel to keep it at stoichiometric. We're going to concentrate here less so on the actual fuel corrections and slightly more so on fuel learning. And so what we're seeing is when the car's idling or it's off load, I think it's more idle related, that the fuel learning is maxed negative. Okay, so what does this mean? It means that potentially there's an inlet tract leak that is causing the airflow to slow down past the MAF sensor, and so the car is responding to it essentially running too rich, as recorded by the front AF sensor. So it's going to try and pull fuel to bring that back into line for stoichiometric. And I suppose one of the things I'm seeing here is that it doesn't look like it's an AF sensor issue, because the AF sensor, the front AF sensor, is hunting around stoichiometric. So we can see the dotted line here, due to the scaling we're using, is centering this data around stoichiometric, and we can see that the AF sensor is hunting fairly well around there, at the same time that basically fuel learning is maxing negative. So I would want to see an improvement in my logs by doing an inlet pressure test. Now I add 1 psi regulated air and smoke to the inlet pipe using a 80mm bung in the inlet pipe. The air's regulated so we can't blow out our cam or crank seals. And we just add that air, which is essentially filling up the inlet, intercooler, the intake manifold and the crankcase. And then we're going to use a combination of soapy water and the smoke in a draft-free environment, very strong torches. And we're going to check everywhere, all over the engine, for hissing, bubbles, or smoke escaping. And this is after we've confirmed that the O-ring in the MAF is properly seated, and we're going to inspect the inside of our airbox to make sure that no air is escaping around the filter, because ultimately all of your basically your closed loop fueling relies on a steady, accurate pressure reference against the air filter. You have an air leak anywhere in the system and it's going to throw off your fuel corrections, your fuel learning. So I would like to get to the owner to, do some tests, make sure there are no obvious leaks with hoses, vacuum hoses and so on, because obviously this is showing very strongly under vacuum. That doesn't mean to say necessarily it's on the boost side or the crankcase or anywhere in particular. It just shows us that we're not getting what we want from this system, at least at idle. And we can check this out in a scatter plot. What have we got going on here? I'm just going to go to some basic graphs here. I want, say, PSI, oh no, that's going to be RPM versus PSIG. Get in there. Versus AFR. And this is mapped by RPM. So this is more or less showing you the airflow, and this is not looking completely terribly bad, just based on AFR. Some of this leanness around zero manifold pressure is potentially just an open closed loop delay thing. That's potentially a tune thing. I'm not seeing that really, it's not under particularly huge load that we're going lean in the mid-range here. However, if we jump over to this parameter and put in fuel learning, well, it looks fine here. Fuel learning's really pretty good. It's going slightly positive here where the car does a lot of driving. However, if we use a filter, and what have I called it? I've called it long-term fuel trim. So fuel trim, long-term fuel trim and fuel learning are the same thing, and out of range shows us where we've gone beyond plus minus 5%, and you can see very strongly that around idle, yes, it's pulling fuel because it thinks the ECU is sort of seeing that it's running too rich. So in order to hit stoichiometric, it's got to pull fuel. Why would this be? Well, normally it's from an inlet leak, an inlet tract leak. And we can also take a peek and just see what the fuel correction is doing, which is instantaneous, really the instantaneous response of the ECU to closed loop fueling. And we can see again that once again under vacuum, yeah, it's tending to be negative. So, you know, if we had a fuel pump issue or something like that, we'd expect to see these figures maxed. So I'm not thinking it's a fueling issue so much as maybe an inlet tract leak. And basically, the moment you get in there and start fixing those leaks, you may see an improvement in your logs, which is great. So we're just going to jump over in both of these graphs to see just where this log is now, where the knock is, sorry. Okay, so we'll just pop that on AFR, oops, AFR again. And then we can use, no, actually I'm just going to put that on roughness averaged. So you can see a little bit under load here, and the rest of it's all sort of offload, and then there's just tons of it at idle. And similarly over here. Scroll down, roughness. There we go. And we can break this down between banks. It's not really telling us much though, other than I would have to say there's slightly more roughness on bank 1. And that could be a clue, because I've seen in my own logs, you know, I had a cam sensor issue. Well, I think the cam sensor was just crapped out. It wasn't really sludged. And I was getting cam sensor dropouts, and I would see a misfire event on the left-hand bank of the engine, and then immediately afterwards it would appear on the opposing cylinder. And that's to do with the firing order, I believe. But anyway, yeah, so generally speaking, what we're seeing is more of the cylinder roughness action on bank 1 here. What does it mean? Well, it's just something to be aware of, especially when you're inlet pressure testing. You know, there might be something that's been overlooked in the rebuild, like an injector seat seal, or maybe even the cam sensor O-ring. It's hard to say. Now, the other thing about this is we can use filters here to. There's a fine learning. Sorry, there's a feedback knock count. Just going to put this back on AFR, and yeah, we can see that, you know, this really is under load, and it's happening in the same region as where we were getting some knock. So I probably want to stay out of knock, out of boost for the moment. This issue may not be blowing up the car, but it's not helping, and that's really what we want to do, is start helping the car come back from the brink. So we can see here the MAF scaling quite nicely. There's no huge discrepancies that we're seeing there. So yes, misfires. The other thing I wanted to discuss is that there is no fine learning knock count being registered, just this feedback knock count. And if we take a quick sneaky peek at what my tuners has said about those knock learning parameters, fine learning knock count is adaptive knock related to a combustion event, which is why it remains pulled in that section of the map and slowly tests to add it back in increments over time. And that particular parameter seems to be inactive, or there just is no combustion related knock happening. Maybe it's been switched off in the tune. I don't know. Personally, it's not the way I'd go about things because I like to see where my fine leading knock count is. And he goes on to say, feedback knock count is noise detected that is not deemed combustion event knock. So that can be anything from clutch springs, heat shields, everything outside of the knock sense frequency range deemed to be actual knock, which is why it pulls out feedback knock count and then adds it back in. And that from Matt McLeod, aka Throttle Happy Tuning, one of many tuners who I use, including Talk Performance and Sean Reagan, aka Sick Chips. All perfectly competent tuners who know a hell of a lot about what they're talking about and who do not mess with the standard knock control strategy on Subaru tunes. Okay, so what this means is that we've got a whole bunch of knock, a tiny amount of knock happening, up here, that is potentially not combustion related knock. So it might be a rattling heat shield or an air guide or anything like that. The idea is to maybe go over the whole engine and ring all the heat shields by tapping them with a mallet and just seeing if they go doing, see if they go digga, and basically bolt them down, clamp them down, do whatever you can to get rid of those knocking, ringing, resonant frequencies. Now, because we're seeing so much cylinder per cylinder roughness in this particular log, there are other considerations which include a loose crank pulley, broken crank pulley sprockets, and last but not least, in amongst all of the other misfire related mechanical things or electronic things, because remember, I think the owner's already done coil packs and so on. So the other thing is that I've noticed, I'm not sure it's an issue so much on later WRXs, but certainly earlier on in the day, if there was an issue with the battery grounds, the battery itself, or the alternator, and this is related to the economy mode of the alternator, that when that alternator is in economy mode and there was maybe some sort of fault with the alternator, that could cause an issue with misfires. Because I think there's an economy mode and it basically takes the load off the alternator and the battery charging goes down to around 12.5 volts instead of 14 volts. On my own car, I use an alternator diode, or apparently there's some wire that you can cut in order to sort of force full load charging all of the time on the alternator. And then of course, if the issue persists, maybe there is also a case for getting the alternator tested using, I believe, a oscilloscope, and what we're looking at is ripple voltage. However, in the meantime, because it's free and because it's just there, I've asked the owner to log battery voltage, just so we can see if there's any correlation in the logs between the misfires and the battery volts, which I can't currently see. So yes, we've pretty much seen that this one's not AVCS related. It doesn't really seem to be tune related. I'm getting the feeling that potentially it might be a combination of an inlet leak that's affecting our fuel trims, but definitely something mechanical. And so look forward to seeing another log. Thanks very much for watching.